The Dallas Stars are off to a very fast start, while the Florida Panthers have struggled since raising their championship banner. Meanwhile, the Minnesota Wild are dealing with injuries and a lack of scoring depth. We've got those stories and more all coming up on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $500 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Dallas Stars, Joey Erickson. And Joey, you got to be encouraged by the first two games of the season for Dallas this year.
Absolutely. Off to a really nice start, picking up a win in Nashville over that new look Preds team. And then they come back home and a wonderful performance from Jake Oettinger, 33 saves against the Islanders for his 11th career shutout. And Dallas is 2-0. I will say it hasn't necessarily been Dallas Stars hockey, but 2-0. Not going to complain about that.
In what ways was it not Dallas Stars hockey?
Yeah, it's been pretty, I guess, uncharacteristic, but maybe it is the first, week of the season. They're going to go through some growing pains, and maybe there's some chemistry issues up front with just some of the new line combinations with the injury to Maverick Bourque. I think that has played into some of their offense. They just haven't been very crisp. It's been a little sloppy. If you look at the Corsi percentages, right, it is not what you're accustomed to seeing from the Dallas Stars, especially at 5-on-5. They haven't been very good at exiting out of their own zone, and they haven't put together a lot of passes through neutral ice. Where they have found success, though, is stretching out the defense, and you can see that against the Islanders and Nashville. The Stars are just flying the zone, and they're throwing stretch passes up the ice, and Dallas is going to make you pay. That's the one thing they're going to be very good at this season offensively is if you have a lapse, if you break down for a second, they are going to make you pay. And we saw that in the second period against Nashville. They scored 3 times. And then in the second period against New York, when the Islanders had a couple of turnovers in their own zone, like the Stars will score. They're just too talented. But in terms of their puck possession and quality of offense, it really hasn't been there. I think it's safe to say that if you would have given the win to who deserved it more, it probably would have been the Islanders and Nashville in both of those games. But look, the Stars are deadly, and if you get good goaltending like they have in the first 2 games, he's been off to a fantastic start. They're going to be a tough team to beat. But maybe it's good as well that they're not firing on all cylinders. You probably don't want them to in October. It's about working towards that. So there's still a lot of positives though with what we've seen. And as I mentioned, 4 points in 2 games is not a bad way to start things off.
Talk to me about Jake Oettinger, because he has been spectacular through 2 games.
Yeah, I was really high on him coming into this year, and I did a segment on this sort of phenomenon over the summer with goaltenders that are young, that play a ton. And then in that 4th full season in the NHL, they seem to pop. And I looked at what you would call generational goaltenders, at least in my generation, like the Marc-Andre Fleury's of the world, the Carey Prices, even Vasilevsky. You look at those numbers, that 4th year, they just really, really established themselves. Not that Oettinger hasn't. He's obviously regarded as one of the better goaltenders, but last season he really struggled. He was up and down with injuries. And I said, I think he's going to have a huge year, and he's off to a fantastic start. He seems to be a lot better in terms of his shots that are high blocker, high glove side. We saw a large amount of goals beat him upstairs last season, which we were not accustomed to seeing. He seems to have that on his side. Also, he's living right. I think the opposition's hit like a dozen posts already in the game. He's been very fortunate. So I don't know what he did over the summer to please the hockey gods. But on top of that, he's faced some high quality looks and he's been really, really good. And yeah, I think this is just his big season to really establish himself as one of the best in the year and our best in the game. And plus it's a contract year, so it probably can't come at a better time.
Yeah, and that has to be in the back of the minds of a lot of Stars fans, especially with the big money that goaltenders are getting, and Igor Shesterkin's still waiting for more. So how does that fit in with the cap long term for the Stars?
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how it plays out. And if you're general manager Jim Nill, you're almost hoping you maybe should have signed him before the season if he continues this play. But they're not going to worry about that. Jake doesn't seem to be that type of player where he's worried about his contract right now, right? He's going to wait till after the season, and the Stars will do business then. But it certainly plays a huge factor because you're talking about players like Wyatt Johnson that need a deal after this season. Jamie Benn, which he won't be much of an issue. He's going to take a lot less than the last contract he signed. But Logan Stankoven, he's going to be due up in a couple years. Those are the guys that have to get paid probably decent, large sums of money as well. But I will say, number one net minors do not always come around. I think you just need to get them done and go from there. It's probably going to be 8 years, probably upwards, could be $8.5 million. It could be a little bit more, but you don't want to be caught in limbo, right? And we saw the mess sort of with Boston and all that. And look, Shesterkin is playing that card. I guess for the Dallas Stars' sake is they have a really good crew up front. It's not like, Shesterkin probably holds a lot more weight on that team than maybe Oettinger does in a lot of ways. But hey, they're number ones. They deserve to be paid as such. So I think the Stars just need to just give them all the money and call it quits, get it over with, right? But easier said than done in the cap world. Hopefully it continues to go up.
You mentioned the Bork injury. Matt Dumba also shaken up in that last game against the Islanders. Any updates on either of them at this point?
Yeah, still not a very clear update on Maverick Bork. We'll see if he plays tonight, which is when they play Seattle. He's skating in practice. He's participating. It's just the soreness. It's listed as a lower body injury, so maybe he'll be good to go tonight. But I think they're going to be pretty cautious once again, and we'll probably see him later on this week. Matt Dumba, which is really unfortunate because Dallas needs some bodies to chew up some minutes on the back end, and he's going to have some imaging done on Monday, so we're going to know more then. But Dallas may have to bring somebody up from the AHL, but Brendan Smith, who came over in the offseason from the Devils, will probably slot in tonight against Seattle, and then they'll go from there. But it certainly hurts because Dallas finally had some righty-lefty combinations on the back end with Miro Heiskanen and Thomas Harley. And last night against the Islanders, it was kind of what Stars fans were hoping they didn't have to see again, and that was that 5-man rotation. Of course, it was out of necessity with Dumba not returning to the game. But look, they're going to need guys to chew up some minutes. But for now, you're going to see a lot of number 4 and a lot of number 55, which I guess it's good that's happening now. It's early in the season. They're fresh, but hopefully Dumba can come back. And I said this as well. I don't know if they're going to miss Dumba for necessarily his play, but it's just the minutes he can take. And the Stars need some guys on the back end to do that. So a little early adversity is never a bad thing, I guess.
What do you think, besides Oettinger, is the biggest key for this team to take that next step? They've been contenders the last couple of years. How do you get over the hump?
Yeah, I there's probably a few factors, but I guess like the offense cannot dry up when it really matters most. And look, the offense wasn't an issue for the entire season until it was. It's one of those things where it's like all of a sudden they can't find the back of the net. Special teams has really been an Achilles heel in those big moments as well in the Western Conference Finals. In the regular season, they've been top 10 under Pete DeBoer in both seasons. They've been off to a very, very bad start now. I know it's a small sample size, but we're seeing some of the issues that we saw back in the spring. So there's something there that they need to make adjustments and make some changes to. And I think that's really what it comes down to is, can you execute in some of those big moments? Because that's sort of been the big issue. It's like the offense just dries up. And we've seen that with Pete DeBoer too in past places where he's been. It's been a trend that you saw in Vegas. You even saw in San Jose. And it's not that Pete DeBoer's had the lack of talent. I mean, good night. I mean, look at the Vegas teams he had and San Jose and now the Stars team. It's just, you got to find the back of the net. And unfortunately, that's been it. I know the defense is sort of the weakness, but really, I think more concerning is just the offense stops scoring, and you just can't win that way anymore. You can't win. You run into a hot goaltender like Skinner did, like they ran into Skinner. He was kind of bad until he wasn't, and that's the sort of way it goes. But hopefully they can get over the hump. They have the pieces, right? I mean, they have the makings of a contender, but yeah, you gotta put it all together at the right time, and hopefully this is the season.
Joey, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Absolutely. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, Locked On Stars. You can follow Locked On Stars on Twitter. My Twitter's Joey the Jet 19. You can find me on all social medias as well. But so happy hockey is back, just watching across the league. And yeah, my Stars are off to a good start. So no complaints here. I'm a happy camper.
All right, Joey, thanks so much. Always a pleasure. Today's episode is brought to you by Hims. Guys, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer, giving you that boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. Hims is changing men's health care by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis and their generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for uncomfortable doctor visits. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personal ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. It's been an eventful week in Florida. Thankfully, Armando Velez of Locked On Panthers is safe and sound. The Florida Panthers got through the hurricane, but dealing with a lot of injuries. But let's start with the good news. The banner raising ceremony took place at the season opener, and it was a pretty special moment.
Very special for the Florida Panthers getting their first championship in franchise history. And the fact that for the Panthers, their focus was still to win that game on the night, knowing that it was an opponent coming in that they've beaten twice in a row in the Boston Bruins. And the banner raising ceremony didn't last long. They weren't going to be calling guys up one by one to get them on the ice. Just get the cup, raise the banner, take one picture, and then it was all back to playing Florida Panthers hockey. And that's really what it just goes to, once again, show the maturity in this group and the leadership that is in South Florida for the Panthers, and just still wanting more in their mission to get another Stanley Cup championship. Gil?
Was there one moment in that ceremony that just stood out to you?
I mean, it was just I think it was actually before the ceremony, because a few hours before the game, I got there maybe around like 2.5 hours before puck drop. And then they were replaying Game 7 on the Jumbotron in South Florida. And then the crowd cheering when Sam Reinhart scored the game winner, and then replaying again and then cheering all over again for that moment of June 24th, 2024. So that was really just reliving the moment in the arena, and then topping it all off with the raising of the banner.
They get a big win over Boston, as you mentioned, and then the injuries start to pile up. Update us on the injuries and the latest, prognosis for some of these guys.
Yeah, so the injuries really started in the first preseason game for the Florida Panthers on that doubleheader against the Nashville Predators, where Tomas Nosek goes down after getting tripped, and then Maurice says that he's not close to skating again, but with that, and along with Aleksander Barkov's injury, they transitioned Tomas Nosek from IR to LTIR. So the first game that he'd be eligible to return would be October 28th at home against the Buffalo Sabres. But then in that second game of the season, Panthers really made a push in the final 40 minutes against the Ottawa Senators after struggling in the first 20, giving up odd man rushes. And then on the empty net goal by Timmy Stützle, Aleksander Barkov slid feet first into the boards. But we had some good news for the Panthers there with Kyle Bukaska's reporting that he was seen walking out of the arena under his own power. And then the very next day, David Pragnata of the fourth period reporting that it looks to be a 1 to 2 week injury. Paul Maurice also spoke about how there is a chance for Sasha Barkov to be back in the Florida Panthers lineup when the Florida Panthers do go on the road to Finland for the Global Series, because if he were to go on LTIR right now, he would actually miss the very first game of that Global Series, the back-to-back against the Dallas Stars in his home town of Tampere, Finland. So also with the salary cap gymnastics, they were able to call up Patrick Giles for his NHL debut that happened on Saturday against the Buffalo Sabres. So there's a little bit of the gymnastics there for not only the cap, but also navigating what their top special teams is going to look like, because on opening night, after the Boston Bruins cleared the puck, hits Adam Boqvist in the face, only had to miss one game, that game against the Senators, but he's back into the mix. The Panthers had to roll 11 F7D on Saturday. Matthew Tkachuk missed one game with an illness, and the Panthers have a back-to-back. So a little bit of the navigating with the injuries, as if you were to look at this Panthers lineup on Saturday, more than 50% of the lineup was not on the roster for when the Panthers played Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. So, along with the turnover and along with the injuries to start the season, it's early adversity for the Panthers, but it's also a great challenge for them as they navigate through everything.
Now, with all these injuries, it's obviously affected the power play. Talk to me about that, and how concerned are you, or is it just the injuries and it's too early to get too worried?
Too early to get worried, but thankfully their one power play goal that happened on Saturday from Sam Reinhart to Sam Bennett, which Sam Bennett in a contract year has 3 goals so far throughout the season. So good for him that he is performing well in a contract year. Also has a little bit of a foundation going on called Benny's Buddies, that he's going to donate money for animal shelters in South Florida for every goal that he scores. So also great incentive off the ice for Sam Bennett. But the Panthers, this was always going to be a thing to navigate coming into this season, with getting a new power play quarterback, with Brandon Montour walking and taking a bigger payday for him to go to the Seattle Kraken in the offseason. But the thing with Adam Boqvist getting him in the right-handed shot, someone who maybe wasn't utilized to the best of his abilities when he was in Chicago and Columbus, and also the mixing and matching. This is something that's going to be that is going to be a little bit of an experiment to start the season. Also with the rotating of the third pair of putting Dmitry Kulikov there and then putting him up to the second pair, also putting Nate Schmidt into the mix, where after him not playing opening night, Uvis Balinskis, who made the team last year, gets another chance this year after getting an extension as well. So that's also a little bit of the mix-up that's really going on the defensive end of the ice for the Panthers.
How concerned are you about the team defense? I mean, yes, it's only been 3 games, but they are giving up more goals than expected.
Yeah, not too concerned at the moment for them. I mean, it was odd man rushes galore again in the first 20 minutes against the Ottawa Senators, but then you see 3 straight periods going from one game to the next against the Buffalo Sabres. But the worry for the Panthers was really for their ability to get through the zone for them against the Buffalo Sabres and getting them deep, and a lot of one and dones for them. Obviously, there's been a few miscommunications there for like stretch passes when you're looking at the speed of the young Buffalo Sabres team that they just faced a few days ago with guys like Tage Thompson, Alex Tuck, who are. There's a lot there. They also faced a desperate team who was still seeking their first win versus a Panthers team who, you're putting a backup goaltender in there, and also 2 of your best guys are out. So it was for the Panthers there, just trying to get through, trying to weather a storm there for the Panthers. And really, it was not the best performance for Spencer Knight, admittedly so, in that first game, as he was giving up a lot of chances from distance, mishandling the pucks, giving up turnovers to create more of that offensive zone time for the Sabres in their Saturday game. But really, it's going to be step by step, game by game for the Panthers going forward, as they still tried to figure out everything outside of that top pair of Eriksson-Ek and Gustav Forsling.
So what do they need to do to successfully defend the cup? It's a long season. There's still 79 games left, but what's your biggest concern at this early point in the season?
It's not. I don't know if the concern is the right word for this. It's just really about sticking to what the systems that have put them to succeed in throughout their time in winning the Stanley Cup, and just the odd man rushes against, being tight in your own, and that first pass out for them, and just getting in for them. But we've seen some also impressive performances, even though they haven't resulted in goals on the PK. Etulis Theranen has proved to be extremely valuable. Anton Lundell, he's the center who's upgraded to the first line every time there's an injury to either Barkov or Bennett. So he's that Swiss Army knife for the Panthers, who can go up and down the lineup for them. And also they have a very promising youngster in Mackie Samoskevich, who missed the majority of camp with injuries for them, and also was put in the lineup towards the last week of the preseason. So he hasn't really gotten a lot of game action for him. And in the first week, he loses his line mate due to him going up in the lineup in Anton Lundell. So a little bit of learning to play with new players as things go on with this team. But Mackie Samoskevich has also been incredible in his ability to get to speed, fake the stutter steps, and then create a lane to shoot. So even if it hasn't resulted in anything, so it's been some impressive. There's have been some impressive individual performances on. Even if they don't have one great shift, they come back the next one, and you see a little bit of maybe what they learned from the previous shifts.
All right, Armando, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
They can follow me on social media on X and Instagram at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on either one, on at FLO_FLA Panthers. And yeah, the show is anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube, as we are continuing to try to grow the sport of hockey in South Florida, as we just saw a Stanley Cup championship banner, and we are hoping for more to come, as the Panthers have definitely put their stamp in not only in the hockey world, but in South Florida sports.
All right, Armando, thanks so much.
Absolutely, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you could start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you could check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page where you place your bets. And you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. October, my favorite month in the sports calendar. You've got the baseball playoffs, college and pro football. Hockey is back, hockey fans. So check out all the latest odds for your favorite team on FanDuel. And again, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. It is my pleasure to welcome back to the show a familiar face and voice to Locked On NHL fans, Seth Tupel of Locked On Wild. And Seth, another tough overtime loss for the Wild on Sunday against Winnipeg. What's going on here for the Minnesota Wild that they're sort of inconsistent early in the season?
Well, I think the phrase, Gil, that I would use is the Wild just are not quite there, I think is what it really comes down to. You had the game against the Seattle Kraken that I feel like kind of slipped away from the Wild. You know, they had the lead. They had a 2-0 lead. Credit to the Kraken for being able to battle back in pretty much every instance. The Wild's 2-0 lead. All of a sudden it turns into a 2-2 game. Then the Wild lead 3-2, then 4-3. And so they kept battling, but the Kraken just were able to have an answer every time the Wilds grabbed the lead. Now, in the game against the Jets, second night of a back-to-back, so just tough circumstances there, I felt like the Wild did a really good job of just kind of battling through. Like, they had very tired legs, clearly. You're battling a tough Winnipeg team on the road against one of the best goalies in the league, and the Wilds more than held their own. It just came down to not being able to take advantage of some odd man rush opportunities. You pot one of those goals. Marco Rossi had a couple of chances in close. Ryan Hartman had an odd man rush in which he was just not able to kind of separate from the Jets defenders. Freddie Gaudreau had another one as well. You take advantage of one of those, it feels like you are able to, maybe steal a win against the Jets on the road. And same thing against Seattle. In overtime, Marco Rossi, Matt Boldy, and Kirill Kaprizov all had opportunities in the OT. They just were not able to get them past Joey Daccord. And so the early part of the season here, it feels like the Wild are just coming up short on their opportunities. I don't get the sense that this is like oh great, here we go again from what happened last year, because in a lot of those games, the Wild were being just thoroughly outclassed by the teams that they played. They were, by and large, the better team against Seattle. They were a tired team against the Jets, but they had moments in which they were able to sustain offensive presence. And so it doesn't look like a team that's just getting thoroughly beat. It's a team that is just coming up a little short with the opportunities they've had so far.
And injuries have clearly played a role. A lot of injuries around the league, but the Wild in particular have been hit hard. Talk to me about the injury situation and the long-term outlook for some of these players.
Well, we've got one sigh of relief and one hold your breath so far for the Minnesota Wild. Joel Eriksson-Ek, who was out of the game against the Winnipeg Jets due to a broken nose, took an elbow against the Seattle Kraken, left the game. He came back with basically a night helmet to try to keep his face from further damage. Didn't work out, so they pulled him from the rest of the game, and then he didn't travel with the team. But he is expected to be available on Tuesday against the St. Louis Blues, so that's good. That is a sigh of relief. Potentially concerning is that Jared Spurgeon was also out of the Winnipeg Jets game and is day-to-day with a, quote, lower body injury. No designation as to what it is. And Gil, I'm going to be honest, I was racking my brain to try to think of any play that could have led to Jared Spurgeon getting hurt over the first two games of the season, and I couldn't think of anything. Doesn't mean there wasn't something, but there was nothing that stood out as, okay, this is definitely where an injury was sustained. But Spurgeon coming into the season off of back and hip surgery, it got so bad last year that he basically, every time he would come off the ice for a shift, he had to retie his skates because his feet were numb. And so he just was dealing with just outrageous things that you wouldn't wish on anybody. So that, I guess, is my chief concern, is that it is some sort of a re-aggravation of that situation. But I would imagine we'll get an update here this week. That is a big one for the Wild if Spurgeon is going to miss any level of time, because he just, not only does his play on the ice help the defense tremendously, but just in positioning everybody else and slotting everybody else in their regular spot in the lineup are just crucial to what this team is trying to get accomplished. So if he misses any sort of long-term amount of time, that's a tough blow for this Wild team.
How would they address it? Who would be the next man up in that situation?
So fortunately, the Wild have a guy named Brock Faber who just stepped into like every pair of shoes imaginable last season. He would be the one, I think, that would step in to take a lot of those responsibilities that Spurgeon primarily is in charge of. And to be honest, he has taken some of them already. Faber is now the primary quarterback of the top power play unit, so he'll keep that. I would imagine he slots in a little more on the penalty kill. Declan Chisholm would probably take Spurgeon's time on the power play if he is out for an extended period. But this team is then going to rely, like they did in the game against the Jets, They're going to rely on that top four of Jonas Brodin, Brock Faber, Jake Middleton, and Zach Bogosian to really do a lot of the heavy lifting, which is a solid unit, but it just doesn't have that same dimension to it that they do when Spurgeon's in the lineup.
You mentioned earlier that you felt like the Wild were just not quite yet there. What do they have to do to get there besides get healthy?
I think one big thing is just getting the first and second lines going at the same time. In the first game of the season against the Blue Jackets, the Matt Boldy line, the second line did pretty much all of the heavy lifting. They looked really, really good in that game, and they were one of the primary reasons the Wild were able to get that win. Against Seattle, it was Kirill Kaprizov's turn, and his line looked fantastic. They were the best line on the ice. In the game against the Jets, I still felt like Kaprizov's line did a good job of pushing the offense, just couldn't quite get anything past Connor Hellebuck. Second line was a little quiet. And so if the Wild can get those two lines going, that's going to really cause some issues for opponents, because if it's just the Kaprizov line, that's where all the attention defensively is going to go, especially on the road. Teams that the Wild go up against are just going to put their best defensive line out there against that trio and just try to take them out of the equation entirely. So if you have two lines that are capable of scoring on a consistent basis, then that limits what your opponent can do, and that takes away some of that last change advantage on the road especially. And so if that Boldy line can just be a consistent driver of offense to complement the Kaprizov line, that's going to help this team. That's going to help them propel the offense forward, and that's going to keep them, I think, in a lot of these games. It's just when you're expecting one line to do everything, that's when things get tricky.
Yeah, no question about that. And hopefully, from a Wild perspective, they can straighten things out and get those two lines going. Seth, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
You can follow me on X at Seth Toups. All my Minnesota sports takes. The Vikings were off this weekend, which I think was a nice little stress-free weekend for me, tweeting out my sports takes. But you can find the show at Locked On Wild. We got lucky, and it's at Locked On Wild for everything. So just search. You'll find all that we have to offer, and we'll keep you up to date all Minnesota Wild season long, and mixing in a little PWHL coverage here this season as well. So be on the lookout for that too.
All right, Seth, thanks so much. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure, Gil.
Thank you for making Locked On NHL your first listen today. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank my guests. I want to thank Joey Eriksson of Locked On Stars. I want to thank Armando Velez of Locked On Florida Panthers and Seth Tupel of Locked On Wild for joining me today. I'm Gil Martin. I host the Monday edition of Locked On NHL, and I co-host the Friday edition along with Rachel Donner. Don't forget, we are here every day, Monday through Friday, bringing you the biggest stories from around the National Hockey League. So make sure you subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe, and thanks for listening to and watching the Locked On NHL podcast.